Next, here's a portion of a book TV program about the assassination of Lincoln and a look inside Ford's Theater, where the president was shot.
James Swanson, let's jump into this. Here is a map that we have of Washington, D.C. You can see the placement of where Ford's Theater is, and of course across the street, the Peterson boarding house. How do you see Ford's Theater today?
I see it as Booth's monument. John Wilkes Booth would have loved Ford's Theater today. It's his personal memorial. All his possessions are in the basement museum. The photographs of his girlfriends, his pistols, the revolver, the Spencer carbine. Booth wanted fame. He once said, "Fame, I must have fame," and he has eternal fame at Ford's Theater. There couldn't be a better monument to John Wilkes Booth than Ford's Theater, and I think he would have approved. I prefer the Peterson House. It's in the Peterson House where you really get a sense of the drama and the sadness of Lincoln's death. More tourists go to Ford's Theater than the Peterson House. On the right time of day, right season of the year, you can be alone in Lincoln's death room, and it's very moving, and it's really my favorite Lincoln assassination site.
Talk a little bit more about the Peterson House. Why did it end up being important? And I mean, why did it end up being chosen?
Well, Lincoln ended up dying in that house because it was so close to the theater, and so many people thought, oh, we don't want him to die in a theater. At this time, people still thought the theater was sort of the devil's house, and this one in particular had been converted from a church, as a matter of fact, and so it already had this unseemly character imputed to it. And anyway, when Lincoln was shot in the theater, and so many people said, gosh, if I'm on my way to heaven, the last place I'd want to start the journey is in a theater. This same kind of feeling was going through the minds of the doctors and other people who were surrounding the president as he lay dying in that theater box. And so they said, we got to get him out of here. Nobody thought for a moment that he could survive the trip all the way to the White House, which was 6 blocks away. And they said, oh, let's carry him to the nearest place we can find, the nearest empty bed, and that happened to be a boarding house across the street.
Now, here is, again, the map with Washington, D.C., and this is the escape route of John Wilkes Booth. Riverside, California, go ahead.
Yes, as Lincoln was a fan of the theater and Shakespeare, had he ever seen Booth on stage before or met him? And also, do you think the fact that Booth was an actor, he had some knowledge of the theater and how to move around and get in and out of there quickly? Thank you.
Mr. Kauffman.
The answer is yes to all of that. Booth had performed in the Marble Heart at Ford's Theater on November 9th, 1863. That's 10 days before Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and the president went to see him there. Booth had a reputation as the gymnastic actor. He liked to leap, as he did April 14th, leap from tall heights onto the stage, and he always put a lot of physical movement into the plays that he performed in. And apparently he was very subdued because John Hay, the secretary of President Lincoln, went along with the president that night, and he noted, more tame than otherwise. I guess they were a little disappointed not seeing all that gyrating and stuff. Now, as for the John Wilkes Booth, his being an actor had something to do with the assassination and the way it was carried out. Absolutely. Booth had been pushing for a long time to have the assassination, or the original plan, which was supposedly to capture Abraham Lincoln. He wanted that to happen in the theater, and it was a completely unworkable plan. But he kept insisting it be that way, and I like to say in my book that he had gone back to the example of Brutus, and that he wanted this to be a public assassination with him on the stage in his own milieu, and giving that dramatic exclamation, Sic Semper Tyrannis. It was all staged. In fact, I argue the entire assassination plot was staged as a playwright might lay it all out.
So what is the importance of the phrase, "you Soctalizing old man trap"? Did I say that right, Soctalizing?
Yes.
Whatever that means.
Well, we think it has different meanings, and what a Soctologizer was. But the point of it is, it was supposed to be a hilarious line in the play. Harry Hawk was the only actor on stage at the time, clear of other actors who could have stopped Booth escape. And Booth certainly timed his shot. to when only one actor was on the stage, immediately after a funny line. The sound of the laughter might mask the gunshot and give Booth even a few more seconds to get down and get off the stage.
Who was Dr. Mudd?
Well, Dr. Mudd was a physician who lived out in Charles County, Maryland, which is south of Washington. He lived in a farm about 30 miles outside of Washington. When Booth broke his leg during the escape, he went down to the Surratt house and asked around about a doctor, and somebody said, well, there's one doctor down the road, Dr. Hoxton, but he's not practicing anymore. So at some point, Booth and the man who was traveling with him, David Harold, ended up going down the line and deciding that they would go visit Dr. Samuel Mudd. Booth had been to Dr. Mudd's house before and had even spent the night there the previous winter. And so they went to his house and spent about 12 hours there. And Dr. Mudd was later perceived to be the guy who had put so many different conspirators together in the first place. And so it started to look to the government as if maybe he'd been in on this plot, and that Booth's appearance at his house after the assassination was not accidental. After all, he was tried and convicted of being a conspirator and was sentenced to life in prison, but was pardoned a few years later.
And the Surratt Tavern that the caller talked about, who was Mary Surratt?
Mary Surratt was a 42-year-old widow who owned a boarding house in Washington. And it was there that many of the conspirators met. John Wilkes Booth frequented her boarding house, and others did too. I'm convinced that Mary Surratt was aware of Booth's earlier plot to kidnap the president. Her son was a Confederate courier, an agent, and one of Booth's intimates. And she also had a country tavern. She met with Booth on the afternoon of the assassination. She took his binoculars and dropped them at the country tavern. She told the innkeeper, John Lloyd, get the shooting irons ready. Parties will call for them tonight. I'm convinced that Mary Surratt was guilty and part of Booth's plot.
And I'm interested in this, which was the front cover piece of a hardbound book that was published by the official court reporter during the proceedings, in which she is right in the middle of all of these people who were tried.
That's right. I mean, not only was she the center of attention for much of the trial, she and Lewis Powell, but also she was perceived by the government as the ringleader. They thought for a time during the period of the trial that she had told Booth what to do, that he was following her orders, that she said, you go out here and you do this and you do that, and that the myth survives even to this day that her house in Washington, the boarding house, which is now the Walk and Roll Chinese restaurant on H Street, that
in Chinatown, in what is called Chinatown in Washington.
That's right. It's on the outside it's changed quite a bit, but at any rate, the myth survives that house was where all the conspirators met. Not exactly true. There was a different place where they met, but Mary Surratt was always, in her own time, perceived as the ringleader.
And of course, one of the most controversial parts is that she was one of them that was hanged at the end, and she was a woman in that period of time.
Yes, Mary Surratt was apparently the first woman ever executed by the federal government. On July 7th, 1865, 4 of the conspirators were hanged, and Mary Surratt was one of them.
Didn't take long, 3 months then,
No,
basically.
It was a quick trial and a very quick execution. They were told that they were sentenced to death and to be executed the very next day. Not much time to prepare.
And these are also some more photos from this book that you put together. Where are these from? These photos from?
These are photographs taken by Alexander Gardner, one of the 2 great Civil War photographers. He and Brady were really the top photographers of the time, and Lincoln had posed many times for Gardner, and he received special permission from the War Department to take a series of several photographs documenting the scaffold, the arrival of the conspirators on the scaffold, the death sentence being read, the hood, and then them swinging in death. It's really the most dramatic series of American historical photographs ever made.
James Swanson and Michael Kauffman, our guests today, both are historians of Lincoln and the Civil War period, and have both written books specifically about the period in time after the assassination of President Lincoln.